Hey there, welcome to Storytime. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And because of that, I've been doing this thing called Storytime, where I read a biblical passage and talk about it with all of my various critical lenses engaged. Or I have a biblical scholar or someone related to biblical studies on for a conversation. And I am delighted to have Matthew Monger on here today. I think if you follow some of the work that I've been doing and the Diablo critics, you know him from that, or you might know his own channel, which is The Bible Was Written Backwards. And I have to admit, I haven't actually checked out any of his videos yet, though I think I would love to at some point, because I'm actually quite interested in what he's up to there. So I am delighted. I think many of you actually already know who Matthew Monger is. So I'm not giving the big rollout here, just bringing him on. Matt, thanks. Matt or Matthew? I always think of you as Matt, but you prefer
I
Matthew.
am.
Is that?
I don't prefer it. I just am that in Norway, but I'll change it right now. So made it easier. I, it's really funny. Like up until the age of 10, I was Matthew. And then I had a teacher in elementary school that called me Matt for the first time. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, can I be Matt? Like, can I change that? And my mom didn't like it at first. It was this kind of, no, but it's my Matthew. And then I went to a baseball game. I played baseball in Little League or whatever. And they said, next up to bat, Matt Monger. And I was like, that's it. I'm Matt.
Love it.
Matt.
Love it.
But then I moved to Norway, and like Matt is like a thing you wipe your feet on, and it was much easier to be Matthew. And so
gotcha.
I became Matthew again.
Okay. So it wasn't just a professional, because I tend to be known by Jennifer in like professional spheres, and Jen to my friends or whatever. So I wasn't sure if it was that, but yes, you do not want to be the thing we wipe our feet on. Right?
No, we don't even. No. Anyway,
we all have our line. Yeah. Okay. So Matt, thank you. So I have to say I've very much enjoyed getting to know you a little bit through our Diablo critic collaborations, and I will definitely miss being a part of that moving forward. But I think we've chatted about this a little bit. What it is I like to do when people come on here is to ask you to tell us a little bit about your story, your journey, whatever metaphor you'd like to use, right? But the story today is you, right? The story for Storytime.
Yep.
Yeah. What parts of, similar to your name change, what parts of your story kind of inform why you do the work you do? I'm a bit of an ideological critic as well, right? I like to talk about who we are, and I think it matters very much. So in terms of the work we do and why we do it, and I think that we need to talk about that element more than tends to happen. So that's what I'm up to, and I'm just going to throw it to you. What would you like to tell us about yourself that helps us understand the work you do? And then we'll get into talking about some of the work you do.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very open-ended start.
It is.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's like, where do you start? I guess like the real beginning of who I am, of course, is my childhood, right? So I grew up in Virginia. It's a
couple hours from where I am.
I grew up in Harrisonburg, Virginia, so just up the valley.
Just up 81,
I think like when if we're thinking kind of my long lines of where I am now, I think like one of the most formative things from my childhood that's kind of led me on this path that I ended up on was my mom going to a Bible study called Bible Study Fellowship.
BSF. Like oh my goodness. I was a part of that for a couple of years. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And so, it's a big deal.
It's intense.
And it's like a full-on curriculum to study the Bible. And
right.
And so
With certain
my
lenses,
mom,
of course, very
yeah, oh,
conservative. Yeah,
definitely. I
right?
mean,
Just to be clear
it's
for people. Mhm.
you know, and there's no like there's nothing free from ideology, so that's fine. And it's
Right.
we're in Virginia, like we're not, you know, it's not
Just want people to know. Yeah, Harrisonburg
yeah.
is not a thriving metropolis. We'll just put it that way, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, but like it was, and so my mom did it, and my grandma was involved. But I know my great grandma was also there and was part of this, and so like
Oh,
this is
wow.
something like that the women in my family on my mom's side were participating in.
Very
And
intense. Yeah.
I remember,
Huh.
like my mom would bring this home, and it was like there were readings and there were questions and there was like preparations, and then she became like a group leader, and
Oh,
then you
yeah.
had to do even more prep because you have
Right.
to, like, you know, make sure people are understanding things correctly.
Yes, this
And
particular interpretation of things. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and so I got, and I would do this with her already, like in elementary school.
Okay.
I thought this was like so much fun
Uh-huh.
because it was like study.
It was.
It wasn't just you read something and it is what it is, but like they gave you, like they ask you, who were these people
Huh?
and what were they doing and what does this say, and like that kind of systematic approach, I guess, appealed to me or hit something.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot compared, I guess, to what
Oh.
normal, you know, 10 to 14-year-olds learn about the Bible.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
came out of that with a lot of a kind of basis knowledge
Huh.
about the Bible, and it was like framed in a positive way, right?
Of
So I
course.
wasn't
Of
like,
course. Yep.
I wasn't drilled in anything like, you know, that made it feel negative. It was just
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
of course, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, that's pretty intense for a kid.
Yes.
But
Yes, it is.
like, you know, it was also, it really gave me the tools that I would later
Mm,
kind of need
mm,
to thrive as a biblical scholar,
mhm, mhm.
because I already had so many details and so many kind of basic understandings of what's in the text
Right,
already in
as it
place.
is. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right. And then, because that's like, especially, that's one of those things that they were really, really good at, is just making sure you know the details of what's actually there.
Right.
And
Right.
that's like, and that's actually something that I think you and I both agree on, that's a really
Absolutely.
good thing to point out from time to time, is what's actually in the text.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
but so that was like my, you know, kind of early childhood. And then I went to private high school. I went to Eastern Mennonite High School,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is
Yeah.
and I mean, Mennonites are great. We went to the Mennonite church also as a kid, and so I had, like, I have a connection to the Mennonite
Okay.
church.
Okay.
I have family that's Mennonite. You know, I have a whole mix of religious and cultural background, I guess, on that. But I
Yeah.
have some Mennonite family going back as well, and so we were in the Mennonite church, and
Huh.
they're really interesting. You know, again, metacritically thinking about it,
Yes.
because they're socially progressive but biblically conservative,
Right.
and that's also a really interesting thing to meet as a youth, is
Huh.
somebody that's telling you that it's good to stick up for the poor, to question authority, question structures, all that kind of stuff. But that is kind of also telling you, stick to the biblical stuff. So you should be doing it for Jesus or whatever. You know, you're like,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
but it's also, it's a really interesting place to be in the world and in the South and in
Especially in the South, right, especially in a
yeah,
conservative town like that.
yeah, yeah.
That's
And so
interesting. Yeah.
it is really it's really a fun, yeah, I mean, it's a fun background to have,
Mhm.
because like,
Mhm.
especially in Europe, like just nobody has that background. It's just, now that
Yes.
I'm in Europe, I'm
It's
just
not a
like,
thing.
it's like, I mean, you know, Mennonites, like, what's that? And I'm like, you
Right.
know, like the Amish basically, but just a little progressive. And they're like, oh, you're an Amish, and then people
Right.
freak out. But like, but then also theologically, you know, it was a good thing to be able to question things in a different way.
Huh.
And so I think that was kind of
Huh.
part of what I had. It wasn't a pure evangelical
Uh-huh.
upbringing, right?
Right.
Even though I did kind of jump into some like Assemblies of God youth groups and things like that, so I got
You got a
my
dose.
charismatic dose there.
That's awesome.
And then I ended up doing Youth with a Mission, which is like kind of
Huh.
not the direct path you would imagine, going from kind of Bible study fellowship through Mennonite churches. But
I'm not familiar with Youth with
so,
Mission. Yeah.
so Youth with a Mission is a pretty large organization. It's very conservative, and they have bases all over the place. You do a disciple training school, and then they send you out to do mission work. And
gotcha. Okay.
and that was well, I mean, I went to Hawaii. That was kind of the main motivation for signing up. Was the 3 months in Hawaii.
Gotcha.
And,
Yeah. I mean, you
and it
got your
was,
priorities.
and oh yeah, and I learned a lot. I mean, again, it was kind of a, yeah, I mean, it's a conservative thing, so they drill you in a lot of the conservative theology, things like that.
Right.
But it was also like a lot of focus on the Bible. So I mean, I got a lot of knowledge again there that has kind of at least stuck with me in certain ways. But I also met a girl there who happened to be Norwegian, and since I kind of had this Mennonite ecclesiastical background, and she was Lutheran, and in the Norwegian church, and we got in a group and a team going to Nicaragua with all these Pentecostals and charismatics, and then people in Nicaragua are Catholic, and it was really weird being there to evangelize the Catholics, and here like my grandma's a Catholic, and then my and Maria, her she's Lutheran, everybody's Lutherans, and it's like it was just that kind of question, like what's really going on.
Yeah.
And so we really found each other in that chaos of being the two people that were like, wait, why would we go preach on the street corner to the Catholics and tell them that you need to leave your Catholic faith and go find this American faith that we're going to leave you with?
But you were, even in the moment, you two were able to have that kind of a view of what you were doing. That's kind of impressive.
Yeah.
Because when you're in it, it can be very difficult to see in a meta way like that. So I'm actually really impressed by that. Okay, cool.
So I mean, we still did the dances, like we had like those dramas and dances and Jesus things and sang songs on the street. So we weren't like rebels, but
but you were having this conversation on the side.
But we did we did have that conversation on the side, and that was really what we connected on, I guess, and that grew into now we're married and have 3 kids and live in Norway, and that was like another big like kind of watershed moment in my life was that whole experience. But we and then I kind of thought, oh well, that wasn't the way to do things. There must be a better way. And so then how do you figure that better way out? Well, you study, right? And that was kind of the next step, would be to learn more so you don't make the same kind of mistakes, because it really didn't change my faith, really, that experience. It just changed my faith in people. Maybe I would say it didn't change my faith in God, right? So it made me really question the motives and the methods that were being used for evangelism. But then I think it didn't change my desire to keep studying the Bible, keep working with God and theology and all that. And so it came to Norway, started on a pure European theological degree, which means like 5 years of theology, like no liberal arts. It's like you do theology, biblical, and that includes biblical studies. So it's like the German tradition where you have systematic theology, biblical studies, church history, and practical theology.
5 years, not just 3.
5 years. And actually I signed up for the 6-year pastoral thing to start, but then when they started making me sing the liturgy, I realized that wasn't going to happen. So I had to drop out of that.
Not your calling.
Not my calling. But so I did that and got it started on studying, and real quick I understood that I knew a lot more about the Bible than most of the people I was studying with, because it was just like we would do stuff and it was like just talking about scriptures, talking about passages, talking about ideas. I'm like, but I know this.
Right. It
And
doesn't say
so
that.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so it got to be a really interesting thing for me to be, well, I was learning Norwegian. So I did all this in Norwegian.
Oh,
So I
right,
moved here and
right.
just immediately started learning Norwegian and
Okay.
took all my studies in Norwegian. And
That's
so that was
intense.
a good
Okay.
advantage, though, to have knowledge about the subject matter,
Right.
but needing to learn the language. And so
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was, so that was, I mean, I enjoyed that, but I think the whole time I was always looking for more. And so I guess my second year, we read one of the books that I talked to you about, that
Yes.
it's a book that pretty much everyone hates in theology, because it's like an old German hardcore biblical studies book called
Okay.
the Torah, and
Torah. Okay.
it's by Frank Kruseman, yeah, and it's basically, it's about the development of the law codes in the Torah and the Pentateuch, and how they fit in. I mean, it sets it in the light of theology and social history, but saying that the laws develop from an early version that fits into a certain kind of socio-historical setting
Mhm.
to other settings, and they get adapted and changed into that.
Mhm.
And for me, that was like this, it was like a shocking but amazing thing to sit there and read these detailed studies of how we can trace how older agrarian agricultural festivals and laws develop into a more urban temple setting, and that's like acceptable, and it's part of the study of the Bible in a serious
Mm.
way.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that was like the first moment that I was like, whoa, this is more than just knowing what's there
Uh-huh.
and trying to figure out what God's saying through it
I
or
was just gonna
whatever.
say, and it's not
But
God dictating something here.
right,
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
development, and it's the human side really started to come through.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that really changed the way I thought of and imagined what it is to work with biblical studies. um
Hmm.
so that was
Mm.
pretty early on, and then I
Mhm.
did
Mhm.
Hebrew and Greek, which we obviously we do. And this was also a big moment for me, because I did Hebrew, and I loved it.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of questions. I was probably one of those students that caused trouble, because I kept saying, well, why is it like that?
Do
and
you mean,
and
why is the language that way, or
yeah,
why
yeah.
is the
Why
okay.
so like, oh, so it's we conjugate this like that, or
Uh-huh,
this is
uh-huh.
the form, and like, well, why would that be, and well, no, it just is.
It
You
just
just have
is,
to
Matt.
accept. Yeah, it just is. And I was like, I don't know. I don't think it just is, I don't know. Like, there must be a reason. And so
Huh.
I just was like, there's got to be explanations. And so I, start doing some reading and stuff. And I'm like, but I can't understand explanations because I don't know anything about language and linguistics. So, I'm living in Norway, and in
Uh-huh.
Norway, education is free. And so I was like, but can I just sign up to take a bachelor's degree in linguistics as well? And they're like, yeah, you could do that. And so I did. So I was like,
Okay, wow.
yeah. So I just jumped, and so while still working on the theology stuff, I just
Yeah.
went to the University of Oslo down the street from the theology faculty I was studying at,
Oh my gosh.
and started doing linguistics. And
At the
that
same
was a
time.
huge, yeah, at the same time. And so that was just huge for
That's
me,
great.
because I remember like opening, my first introduction to morphology book,
Yes.
or
Yes,
something like
yes,
that, and being
yes.
like, this changed my life.
Okay, that's
Like,
awesome.
it's like there's structure, there's meaning, and we can
Right.
discuss how these meanings are constructed through these structures. um,
Yes.
and there were explanations.
Right.
But the thing about linguistics is that linguistics principles, like, aren't truths. They're
Observations.
statistical observations.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, you can say languages tend to do
Uh-huh,
this
uh-huh,
or
uh-huh.
tend to do that.
Yes.
but there's almost always exceptions to the tendencies.
Okay.
And so like you know, and that's just so beautiful. It just gives you this freedom to say that what I see, what I'm analyzing is that's how I understand it. But it might be different, or it might be different in a different language, but that's okay.
Uh-huh.
Um
Uh-huh.
oh,
Oh,
let's see. I don't know. Did something happen?
no,
Oh,
you're still
there.
with us.
Sorry, no,
And nothing
something
changed.
popped up on my screen. I don't know
Gotcha.
why. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And so that was like, you know, that was another kind of movement in the way of broadening what studying is, what really working with yeah, academic work in general.
Mhm,
But then I
mhm.
was doing it because I wanted to apply it to the Bible, right?
Right, right.
And I was really, really lucky also that I got to the University of Oslo when there was a German professor of Semitic languages, Lutz Edzard, who was there, and he took me under his wing, and so I did a minor in Semitic languages when I did my linguistics degree.
Okay.
And the whole time he kept saying, and we'll just go straight into the master's program, right? We're going to do the master's degree. And so I ended up doing a master's degree in Semitics,
Aha.
as well, under his
Tutelage?
tutelage or whatever. Yeah, it just sounded weird in my
Yes,
head.
I know, but what else are you gonna say?
Yeah, yeah, and there I got to do you know, the Semitic languages, and most
Yeah.
significantly for me was doing Akkadian,
Akkadian. Okay.
and so that was like the first big language I did outside of the biblical languages.
Okay. Yeah, and
Mm,
so, yeah, I'm curious about that. I knew Frank, Sasson, Doc Jack Sasson,
mm,
was it? Yeah.
mhm.
He gave me a set of his dictionary set, as he was he was retiring, so he's like, "Hey, do you have a copy?" And I'm like, "No." And he gave me a CD,
Yeah.
let me pick from his CD collection. That's my a very brief, association with him, but because of that, right, the Akkadian
Yeah.
man, right, what is it to you? Why is Akkadian what was the draw, or why was that so important?
Well, I mean, it started off as as just that fascination, right? So I
About
mean, I'm
the
doing
language
linguistics. I'm going
and
to
the
do a minor,
morphology.
and
Mhm.
you have to do a minor in a language group, and so Akkadian was the oldest Semitic language you could
Okay, right,
study, and so that
right.
was kind of
Okay,
how I went into it.
okay.
But you know, I ordered the book John Hunegard's Grammar of Akkadian,
Okay.
and I remember the day it came in the mail, and opening this, you know, this giant book,
I
and
imagine.
open it, and seeing the cuneiform, and the feel of that book, the smell, the
Mhm.
everything is real. Like, it almost brings tears to my eyes. Like, it
Wow,
was such a big
wow.
thing
Yeah.
because it was just so amazing again that I can just do this. I can just study this. I can learn
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
in that course, we
Hmm.
did,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously we did grammar and language and all that, but then we read um, Hammurabi, the
Mhm.
laws of Hammurabi, and
Mhm.
we read Gilgamesh, and
Yeah, not in
in
English, but in
Akkadian,
the right,
but
right.
in the
Yeah.
original, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you read, excuse me, when you read slowly,
Mhm.
like you have to when you're learning like that,
Mhm.
it just makes it so much clearer how similar things can be. Like, you see the details of these connections to the biblical stories, to the biblical laws,
Uh-huh.
to
Uh-huh.
stuff. Because like when you just like if you just glance through
Mhm.
Gilgamesh, you're like, oh, it's
Mhm.
the story of this king, and he goes out, and there's a alien thing that comes down, and he's a wild, untamed, and they run around and they kill a bull, and then he dies, and then he runs off, and it's a story, and it's fun. But like when you
Right.
really sit down and you look at it, you can see all these things, and you like time and again say, wow, wait, that there's a connection here, there's something I
Mhm.
recognize. And especially with Hammurabi, I mean, when I
Mm.
sat and we read week after week after week, and I kept
Mhm.
doing this for years with a group
Okay.
of people, that we would just read through, you know, the text again and again, and you see like the connections to the laws in the
Mhm.
Bible. And so I ended up doing my or my MTH, so my Master of Theology thesis on the Covenant Code and Hammurabi,
Aha.
because I had already gotten into Akkadian then, and And this is where I ran into David Wright's work.
Okay.
And I started working with this before his book came out. He had a few articles, but basically became this book, Inventing God's Law. And this then was another one of those massively influential books that
want to get so people can see the subtitle there.
Yeah. So what this is, it's a study of the laws of Hammurabi and the way the covenant code. So Genesis 22 through 24, basically are a rewriting of the laws of Hammurabi. And so the covenant code is in some way receiving and adapting these laws into the Israelite society. And it was that also for me was like one of those things where you're just kind of like, it becomes so clear when you study it that deeply that you end up with that feeling of, okay, there's no other explanation. Like it might not be that the exact copy of Hammurabi that we have in the Louvre is the exact copy that was copied, and we don't know exactly where and who did the actual thing, but they knew this document. Somebody knew this document that knew Hebrew, and this document ended up in it being influential in the formulation of the Hebrew laws as we have them. And then when you get there, it's kind of like, man, but the Bible is something different. Right. And that's why both learning Akkadian was kind of one of these steps, working with the Inventing God's Law, and then also just having read these things, the Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, the reading through Hammurabi, that you again and again and again end up with the same conclusion, that there is something behind here. And I didn't know. So I didn't have a lot of tools to deal with that at that point.
Okay.
I think that was I was still, young and interested in just learning as much as I could. And then of course I learned, went into other languages too. So I did all the standard stuff and did my Syriac and did my Aramaic and did Ethiopic and did, Arabic and Sumerian and did all the stuff. And then you leave some of this stuff by the wayside for a while. It just kind of becomes part of the background, but it's not foregrounded in everything you're doing. So I was.
So can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when I first saw the title, Inventing God's Law, that just appeals to me personally. I'm like, yes, exactly. But at the time, were you far enough along in critical thinking and reassessing that it wasn't a theologically, it wasn't shocking anymore to say that it was an invention?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't know it then, but yes, I was. And this is a really interesting thing I've been thinking a lot about recently. I actually just did an interview for a Norwegian Christian newspaper where I kind of had to rehash some of this stuff because they wanted to write about the seminary professor that came out of the closet as an atheist, and so it was so that's going to be appearing. So all you Norwegians out there, just be looking for it. But
fascinating that they wanted to. I don't know. It's interesting.
It was but anyway, it should be it should be fun.
Okay.
But so I've been thinking about that, like that question, and I mean I can look back to my studies like really early on. That like I one of the first things papers I had to write was on the concept of an undying soul in the Hebrew Bible. Right. And so when I did that as like a super, green theology student, I, came to the conclusion that there was no evidence for that.
Right.
And
it's like, oh goodness, how did that turn out?
And so that was like, I mean, that's what I wrote. And, I submitted that paper, and my professor, wrote back to me like, this was great. This was really, really, really good. You really hit something. You've done great work, and you come to the right, and it really encouraged me. And I was like, I think, and I just accepted it. Like there wasn't a, I didn't, like, I don't have a hard time just accepting things once they're there. I want to make sure I know what I see. So I like good research, but I just accepted that, right? And so then, you do that, and so okay, no undying soul. Okay, well, but that's not a problem. I'm sure Jesus has something else going for him. Like it wasn't like a big deal. We can resurrect from the dead. We can rise from the clay. We can do whatever. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
Work out in the end. Okay.
But then, and then you go on with the critical study of things, and it's like, well, we start to learn things about, like, okay, Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, and you're like, yeah, no big deal. Like, that's good. That makes sense. And then start reading these things. You read the, the Creation Chronicles, and you read the Nameless, you read all this kind of stuff, and you're like, okay, so God didn't create the world like that. Oh, that's okay. That's not a big deal. Like, it's all right. Like, I mean, obviously they were in their context and they're trying to, write as best they can. But the really important thing is Jesus.
Right.
Like, I mean, and I remember for a few years I had that kind of slogan, like, I mean, come on, I believe in a guy that rose from the dead. It doesn't really matter who created the world. Like, it was that kind of like nonchalant, like, it's, if you believe in that miracle, what are all the other things? Like, you may as well just, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Exactly. It's like the ultimate trump card or something.
Yeah. And so I was really at that, I guess, at that level of development that I was able to accept findings and facts and data and that kind of thing. But I guess that there was still that kind of compartmentalized area of faith that, like, with the Jesus story, that kind of stuff,
wall around it.
And I mean, even the critical study of the Gospels, the historical Jesus, I thought was super interesting. I thought it was like I thought it was weird that people would fight about which particular words Jesus actually said or not. Like, I didn't like. I had a great teacher my very first year, a New Testament teacher, and this was, I was brand new in Norway, and this was one of the first lectures, and I think he was trying to shock us, and he said, like, he was saying, the Bible isn't what you think it is. Like, it's always like cloaked in this sacred language, and and so he said a big example of that is when Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Like, what he actually says in Greek is like, F you get the H out of my, I don't want to curse on your channel because you might have people that don't appreciate it. I don't want to get you demonetized or anything.
I appreciate that. I do drop.
He dropped the F-bomb in class, right?
Wow.
But he's Norwegian. He's speaking Norwegian, but he switched to English to curse, which was and that's something too that I think people do. But it's really funny. And I was shocked, right? I was blown away by this, but he then would say, so, but do we think this is Jesus's words? And then he's like, oh, well, I don't know. I wasn't there. And that was kind of his cop out. But also a really important thing is that, like, he would always say when somebody said, oh, but if Jesus did this and Jesus did that and that and that, and he would just say, I don't know. I wasn't there. That's what the text says. But we don't really know what was actually said. So that's somebody else's words saying that Jesus said that. And so I think that kind of idea that there's so much back there that we don't know is also something that was just kind of became this, I guess it wasn't, for me, it wasn't cognitive dissonance, but it was like cognitive space, that you can accept things, you can accept theories, you can accept even theological challenges, because it's like there's just so much we don't know. Like, there's that space,
right? And
so
it was an easy way for you to start metabolizing some of these new pieces.
And then when I started with the linguistics, then we're doing historical linguistics and reconstructing language families, tens of thousands of years, and we're talking about Hebrew existing before the Bible. We're in Hebrew not existing before long after the Akkadian things are written. And so there's like all these things start to where you can, when you don't know that much about a subject and you think, hey, those, Gilgamesh or the Enuma Elish or Hammurabi, the Bible could have influenced them. Like, that's just something you could say, right?
Right.
It's,
People
well,
do
it's
like to
something
say.
you can say. It's like, it could go both ways. You never know. Until
you actually
until
know.
you know. And then it's like, it would be very difficult for the Hebrew language to have been influencing the older Akkadian stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and for a lot of reasons, but just from the historical one, and to also just be learning that and accepting that makes also things change. And so and then you read the Hammurabi and say, oh, well, the laws are invented. Okay, that's fine. It's just part of this kind of that developing theology or view of the Bible or whatever it was that I was doing. But the whole time it was because I was studying it. And so I always felt like it was honest, and it was engaged, and it wasn't like a sinful thing, I guess, like if we can put it like that.
Yeah.
Like, I was engaged in the church. I was doing good things. I was praying. I was a good person, and like, so I didn't ever think that was a problem,
Okay. Yep.
And then and so then I'm doing all these things, studying all this, and part of our linguistics program was that we had to take a language that they called, it sounds a little, I don't know if they can call it that anymore, but it's called like strange language. Is the name of the course.
Okay.
And that's where they pick a language that one of the professors of linguistics knows that is weird. So it's like not Indo-European or Germanic or it's like something outside. And so one of the professors had done field work in Cameroon and learned Fulfulde, the language of the Fulani people. And so he was going to teach that. And so I signed up for it. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, this language has like 24 grammatical genders.
What?
This is something we should talk about. Yeah. So so it's just like anybody that tries to tell you that there's only grammatical gender is the same thing as sexual gender in humans. Like, they need a lesson in grammar. Like, I will talk to them any day. But and in that language, all humans and gods are in the same gender. So like, they're all gendered the same in terms of grammar, but then like other stuff gets put into all these different things.
Fascinating. So, it's not the humans. Oh, that's interesting.
Nope. So it's not the humans. It's like, so I mean, like a great example would be like a tree. So a tree would be in the tree gender. And and you would like know that it's a tree gender because it would have a key, like as the ki as the pronoun. But like, if you want to talk about the the leaves of the tree to make medicine, then it's in a different gender. Or the fruit of the tree would be the same word, but then in a different gender again. And so like, you always know what things are, because like the root would get gendered into a different gender, or noun class, as we call it. So it's,
okay. I'm sorry, but now you're making sense of something that I've just never asked my sister-in-law, whose family is Norwegian, I think, maybe Norwegian. That's terrible. It's terrible that I don't know that. But anyway, and she likes to call when she talks, she takes pictures in nature. She's a biology person, and she takes pictures, and she refers to the animals in particular as ki instead of he, she. And so I don't know if that was where she got that or not, but I don't. So are animals a different gender than I would think animals would be different than
animals
trees.
are different genders. Yeah.
So, okay.
And different animals can be in different genders, actually, and it probably has something to do with both their size and their shape and the use of different things. So,
the way they get around. Okay.
Yeah. So like the elephants and giraffes are in the same gender because they're these giant things.
And, okay.
Huge gender. Huge.
Okay, I need to ask you about that. Okay.
But anyway, so that was
back to
off on a tangent.
No, it's fun though. It's fun. It's fun to talk.
Yeah, but so anyway, while I'm taking that class, the Norwegian Mission Society calls me and says, So we hear that you like have a master's in theology. You're studying linguistics and Semitic languages, and you should probably just come work for us and go to Mali and help translate the Bible to Fulfulde.
Oh, for
Which the
real?
language I was literally working with,
Literally,
and I'm
yeah,
like,
at the
yeah,
time.
and I'm like, that this must be you, God, it was that kind
Right. Oh,
of,
yes.
yeah,
Okay, you're
yeah,
still in that
oh
phase
yeah,
of, yep,
oh
yep.
yeah.
Okay,
So it
this is
was just
God's
like
hand
this.
at work.
It must be. This is God's hand. Like
Uh-huh.
everything I've ever done in my
Right, is
entire
working
life
to
has
this.
led up to this point, right? It was, but that's the way I felt it. Like
Yeah,
it was
sure. I mean,
impossible to say no.
it's kinda yeah.
So we did, as we said yes, and spent a
Huh.
year in France learning French
Okay.
because Mali is administratively
Right?
French,
Uh-huh.
and went to Mali, and it was horrible. It
Oh.
was filled with fear and
Mm.
threats and
Because you're a
really
missionary? For
well,
your
because
life?
we were in a place that was really unsafe.
Okay,
We were in
unstable.
northern Mali in the
Okay,
time when it was becoming really unstable.
okay.
I mean, there was also sickness. It was malaria, and we had kids that were 1,
Scary.
3, and 5.
Yeah,
Um,
scary.
just like a lot of weird stuff going on, yeah.
Okay.
And it was just
Huh,
it didn't work out at all. I mean, we
okay.
tried, but it was impossible, and so we ended up having to leave because of health reasons. But then right after we left, then the whole country fell apart. There was
It was just undone.
there was a coup, and then there was the Al Qaeda was in the north and attacking, and then the French soldiers came in. There was a war, and so we were really really
Wow.
happy to not be there when all that
Yeah,
went down.
yeah.
Um,
Wow.
but the what we what we felt then was that we couldn't be there. We had to leave. It was horribly disappointing. It was like betraying God and the call or whatever to not
Mm,
continue
to
with
not
it.
fulfill that. Mhm.
But at the same time, it was horrible on us, on us and the family, and it
Yeah,
was just the strain and the pressure, and it was just not good. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
we came back, and
Huh.
then one of the things that people started saying, it was, oh, thank God that he took care of you. um and that was like again and again, oh, God really took care of
Ah,
you.
and that
um
was like a, "Really?
yeah,
Did he really?"
yeah, yeah. That was like, I mean,
That was
that was kind of the
breaking.
really defining moment
Uh-huh.
for me to start actually questioning things, was
Okay.
people saying, you are so lucky that God loves you so much that he would take care of you and have his hand over you. And I remember there was one guy that said, like, I hope, like, when you're, I know it's disappointing and painful, but I wonder when you'll realize that this was God acting the whole time. And
Wow! People were
yeah,
saying it that
yeah,
explicitly.
yeah, 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 yeah. Not
Yeah,
hiding it at all.
right.
And so that was like, I think that hit me as suddenly this thing. I have to deal with theology.
Yeah. Did
I
you
have
wanna
to
curse
deal
any
with
of these people
more.
off? Did you tell any of them to fuck
Oh,
off?
well, I
mean,
wasn't that kind of person.
yeah,
I was
yeah,
too
yeah.
nice, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And I did I oh, I hadn't spent a lot of time in therapy yet at that point, so I didn't know that I needed to express it somehow and have
Yes.
somebody I could talk to about
Right,
it.
right,
And
right, right. Okay,
so
fair
I
enough.
was pretty bad. I held a lot of pent up aggression inside me.
Well,
Yeah.
that is part of what that
Yeah.
framework will do. Yep, to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and so basically that
Okay.
set
So
me down a path of asking questions of, what do I actually believe?
uh-huh,
Um,
uh-huh.
and so my wife, I got a job as a pastor when we came back. She's our minister. She was ordained Lutheran minister when we went
Okay,
out as well, but came
okay.
back and found a job. And so we went, and it's a place where I still live. Actually, it's in outside Oslo.
Okay.
Beautiful place. We had lived here a couple years when we first got married, and she spent a lot of time in her youth here in this town.
Oh,
So it
nice.
was
Yeah.
natural when we got a job here. We felt like, oh, we'll come back.
Yeah.
But after a couple years, it was clear that she had actually kind of developed PTSD from the
The time in Mali.
situation. Yeah,
Okay.
and so
Oh,
that really
right.
started to become evident and become an issue.
Uh-huh.
And
Sorry.
then but when that happened, it made us have to start talking about the difficult stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it finally got to the point one time where we could just like look at each other and say, but we don't believe in this.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and it was, I remember one time, like just before I'd really gotten to that point was when I met Kip
Oh, really?
Davis.
Okay. Okay.
And we like, so basically I didn't believe in anything, but I remember we were out fishing. He came along to my in-laws cabin, and we were out fishing, and
Nice.
Kip like said, but how can or do you still believe in the resurrection, knowing everything we know about
Mm.
everything else and all of the literature and all of the ways things became and everything else? Do you still believe in it? And I think I was just like, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Uh-huh.
that was the first time anybody really put me to it,
Put it really
because like,
clearly, yeah.
yeah, like, because everything else was like, it's easy to get around it.
Uh-huh.
Right? You
Exactly. No,
can,
it's
but
true,
like,
right?
and then like, yeah, I think that was also a big thing to get me to just ask myself that question was, but
Yep.
do I like, what happens if I don't?
Mhm.
And what I realized was nothing happened.
Sorry. That's
No,
just so nicely done. Like,
it,
yeah.
yeah. And basically it took a little while for me to realize it, that
Yep.
I had for 10-15 years
Yeah.
been doing what the kids today call deconstruction.
Right, right, right.
um,
Yeah.
I had been learning that things aren't as they seem. You can't
Right.
read it literally. And
Yep.
then getting rid of creation, getting rid of the law, getting rid of hell, getting rid of
Mhm. Mhm.
explaining all those things in different terms.
Mhm.
But I had still just kept my theological or salvation
The
focus
Christological piece. Mhm.
on the Christological
Mhm.
piece.
Mhm.
And that was kind of like, as long as I don't touch that, it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it really just took the shock of people
Oh,
like really not wishing me well, wishing
right.
me suffering
Right.
for God.
Right. And they
And
don't even
yeah,
realize that's really what they're saying, right? That's the
right.
part that's
Yeah.
tricky is
Yeah.
they actually thought they meant well.
Mm.
What they
Yeah,
thought they were
they
doing
thought they
was
were
encouraging.
comforting. Like they
Yes.
think they're doing some kind of pastoral care, like, yeah,
Right.
God is with you in your
Oh,
suffering, and
yeah, isn't that
He's protecting
amazing?
you.
He
And
did
like,
this to
wow,
you.
we prayed for
Yeah.
you every day, and it worked. Like, good for us. Yeah.
But I am very sorry that for what that did
Mm,
to you, your
mm,
family, your wife, like Maria, like, I'm very
mm.
sorry to hear that I hope that
Yeah.
she's better or she's working through that. I know this isn't what you came on here to
Mm.
talk about, but
Yeah.
just
No,
because you said
it's
it,
an
I wanna make
ongoing
sure.
process. Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
it's
Yeah.
something I think we'll deal with probably the
Okay.
rest of our lives, but
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
it's definitely something that we're together in, and so
Which is
that's a good thing.
amazing. I
Yeah.
was thinking that too, that,
Mm.
it's such a good it's fortunate, like, that piece is fortunate that you're in it
Yep.
together and you went
Yep.
through it, but also that you could look at you were processing the crap that people were saying, all of pieces at the same in the same way, like,
Mm.
and not that
Yeah.
doesn't always happen for couples,
No.
right?
No, we're really, really lucky.
Yeah, I'm very happy
So
for you in that level on that
yeah.
piece, yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Goodness, wow,
Yeah.
wow, okay, um,
Yeah.
I
So
feel
there
like
you go.
this just went
You want
really
my story? You're getting
yes,
stories.
I did.
So-
Thank you
yeah.
for that,
Mm.
for the vulnerability about that,
Mm.
yeah, and I'm trying to circle back to the work that you
Mm.
do, I'm I'm kind of stuck right now. I'm like, oh gosh, that's just big stuff. Glad that you all got out safely. I don't know. I'm you know, all those pieces.
Mhm.
Can we get back
Yeah.
to the
Yeah,
work you
yeah, yeah.
do?
So, like, I mean, the thing that's really, like, been interesting for me is that when we came back, I spent a year working for the Norwegian Sunday School Association.
I'm sorry, that just is not
I
what I
know,
expected you to say.
I know, that's why I said it. But I went in just to be a consultant because I needed something to do, and
Right,
we knew
right,
somebody,
of
and they were
course.
like, "Oh,
I
we have,
understand.
we have an opening, come in."
Right.
And I ended up, like, doing a lot of, like, just data entry, computer stuff, and then also helping advise them on how to communicate some of the stories to children that
Without traumatizing them.
without traumatizing them. And so I felt like that was a good contribution.
Oh,
But
goodness.
then I got into the PhD program
Okay.
at MF where I teach now as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I started working on the Book of Jubilees, and that was also became, like, super influential, because I started working on Jubilees because it is something that is I mean, it's written in Hebrew originally, but we only have a little bit of it among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and
Okay.
then there's Ethiopic manuscripts of it.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I wanted to use the Semitic language, the languages, and have that kind of as my thing. And I was going to do a reception and transmission history of Jubilees, was kind of what I wanted to do.
Aha.
But I found out that the work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, um, manuscripts of Jubilees, was very maximalistic. So it kind of just took a reconstructed Hebrew text based on the Ethiopic and said, we've got lots of really good manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls of Jubilees. And
Huh.
when I looked at it, it was like 90% reconstructions and 10% actual words.
Oh.
And so I was so shocked when I uncovered that. I was like, somebody really needs to go in and actually do more detailed studies of this and see what Jubilees looked like among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so that's
Interesting.
how I got working on that, and ended up doing my dissertation just on the Dead Sea Scrolls side, and not
Oh,
on the whole reception history of Jubilees.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
but Jubilees in itself is super cool because it is the reception history of Genesis, right? So Jubilees rewrites Genesis and the beginning of Exodus into a time, probably in the early Hasmonean period, so probably sometime after the rebellion against the Greeks,
Uh-huh.
and it's written into um, a, a Jewish climate that is thinking of specific things, right? So that
Yeah,
they
yeah.
changed the calendar, um,
Huh.
and they changed the some of the focus on the festivals, so that things kind of are always done correctly, and it fixes some of the stuff. But it uses the solar calendar instead of the lunar calendar that we have in the Hebrew Bible,
Huh.
and so that really is an obvious rewriting, right? It's
Yes.
obviously adapting and bringing into a
Yes.
new context.
Right.
And so that's kind of that's, I just thought it was super fun because I'm already thinking about Genesis as the reception of earlier traditions, and then
Exactly.
Jubilees is the reception of
Of
that
that
reception.
reception. Yeah.
And then what I'm doing now stems out from that as well,
Huh.
because within Jubilees, one of the things that it does is it gives names to the women in the genealogies of Genesis 5 and
Oh,
10,
really? Those
or 5 and
women. I was
11.
like, "What
Yeah.
is
So
he
it's
talking about naming the
yeah,
matriarchs?" I'm like, "Oh,
yeah.
I
So
need a
it's the
moment.
and
I need
so
a
they
moment to process. That's so cool."
yeah.
Okay.
And because in Genesis it says, like, in Seth was 167 years old, and he sired
Right, yeah.
Enosh,
Was
and
the father of.
Enosh was the father of
Mhm.
and it goes down this list,
Yeah.
but there's no women between Eve and
Right,
Sarah,
right.
except for Cain's descendant Lamech's two wives,
Oh,
which is, it's very random that they show up. But anyway,
totally, right?
um, but in the direct line between Adam and Abraham, or from Eve to Sarah, there are no other women.
Right.
But Jubilees gives names to all
Okay.
of the women.
Makes me so happy.
Yeah, and so what's really what's really cool then is that these women's names show up in all these really interesting sources throughout antiquity and the Middle Ages. So we have, and the reason I call them the names of the wives of the matriarchs is because there's a 8th century Syriac manuscript that has a list of the names as they appear in jubilees, but then, I mean, written in the Syriac script.
Right.
And the title of it is The Names of the Wives of the Patriarchs, according to the Hebrew book called Jubilees. And so that's like one of the, like, it's a very clear reference that they've extracted, like the names have been extracted and are in a list. But they also show up in all these other random places. We have in Armenian lists, probably copied from Syriac, but maybe from Greek. They're as notes in the margin of a Greek Bible, or actually 3 different Greek manuscripts. They are found in Hebrew in a list similar to the Syriac one in the beginning of a 11th or 12th century Bible. It's a Hebrew Bible codex.
So kind of putting it next to the original.
Yes.
Filling in the gap in the Genesis.
Well, and that's the thing, and they serve different functions, and so that's what I'm studying right now and trying to put a book together about, is the way that they're not only appear in these different places, but they serve different functions. And so, like, it's not just that somebody said, hey, there's those names, but they do different things. And so in some of the earliest things are actually found in Epiphanius, the church father who wrote against all of these other sects. And he uses some of the names of these women as arguments about that they call the daughters of Adam and Eve this, but we know that their names are these, and gives the names from Jubilees. Or the same with the wife of Noah. He says that some Sethians or one of the sects that he argues against says that the name is Noriah, which we actually know from Coptic Gnostic documents. Noriah was supposed to be the wife of Noah, but Epiphanius says no. We know that her name was Barthenos, which is the name that's found in Jubilees, and so that's used as in a heresiological way, in an anti-heretic way, right? And so they're used as important details there. But then we have in other places they're used in the World Chronicles. So the Christian authors use some of these names, and in some places all of them, as a way of filling out history, not filling out the biblical story. And so they're listed within the generations of, that ends up going all the way up to their time in the 500s, 600s, 700s or whatever. But it's like they become part of the actual history telling. And then in other places, they like you said, they're kind of filling the gaps. They're as almost like a trivia or it's like the front matter in a Bible or that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What? Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to engage this, but part of me is wondering: is there a sense in terms of why the Book of Jubilees, like why there was a need or a desire to name these women in Jubilees? Like, was there like a contextual reason that would help explain that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's double. I think there's two double. I say that was a very Norwegian American way of saying it. It's there's a twofold response to your question.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would say on the one hand, so my colleague or former colleague, still colleague, I would call it, but Esther Brownsmith. He has written about kind of similar thing in Judges 19 and the naming names as a phenomenon. She uses a term taken from Saidiya Hartman and the critical fabulation, which is done in slave studies and thinking about giving names and stories to the slave women who are underrepresented in our stories and in our histories. And Esther uses that term as like an exegetical fabulation or a critical fabulation that is reading the text and giving it, it's taking something and adding to it, but it's doing it on purpose, but it's also within this midrashic exegetical framework. So it's not random. It's not just fan fiction at that level, but it's really a deep engagement. And so I think that's part of it. So I do think that it's part of what's happening. But on the other hand, Betsy Halpern Amaro, do you know of her? So she's written on this the topic of empowering women in jubilees, and she notes that the women seem to guide the story of when it's going to go bad. So like the women are, they're given names like Edna and things like that, like like paradise and like lovely and nice and all that. And then you get to a point in the genealogies where suddenly the women are not daughters of the direct line. They are not endogamous, they're exogamous marriages. And this leads the people astray, right? This happens at the key moments where we see that the line ends up in Babylon, right? So this is one of the things that I think that actually the women are used specifically to craft a narrative that makes sense of why Abraham is living in Ur of the Chaldees.
Oh, wow.
At the beginning of Genesis 12. So I think I think that's actually what's happening is it's like, because one of the women is actually given the name Orah, the daughter of Chaldee. And so
wow.
So so she's like, and I mean, Orah means light in Hebrew, but it's a play on Ur as the name of the city. And so it's really obvious when you look at it in Hebrew that it's that kind of play on words.
Play on words here.
And so I think that so it is this, I think it's on the one hand, it's an opening in the text, it's a lack in Genesis that you can play with and add to. But on the other hand, it's craftier than just like it's not just a, hey, here's the nice names of everybody, but we're doing something on purpose to signal where virtues were left behind.
Exactly. And it's blaming the women.
Right. Yeah. And it's blaming the women. And it makes sense too, especially when you think about the so in Jubilees, Abraham does this thing where he burns the idols, and so he sorry, my Norwegian brain switched on. I was just about it's so
it's getting late there. Is that part of it?
Yeah, but he burns the idols of his family, and this is something that's hinted at in Genesis, that he didn't follow in the ways of his father or whatever. And this is kind of made more explicit in Jubilees. And I think that's part of the point, is that he's Abraham is seen as someone who was, tricked into a bad setting, and he was the good man, but it's the fault of the women, of course, definitely, because they like, if the men had married women from the right
people,
family, everything would have been okay.
From our people, so, don't marry outside. Yes. Oh, dang it! It is so not surprising, but I was trying to enjoy the moment, right?
But I mean, and that's the thing, but that's what I'm negotiating when I'm writing this book and writing about these things, is this, it's really easy when I talk about it for people to be like, oh, tell me all about these women's names, and this is so cool. And then I'm like, well, like, it's not as great as we'd like it to be. But then they do get used for better things, right? I mean, I think the curiosity develops, and then they show up in the other manuscripts, and the other things are more because they're saying, they read Genesis, and it's obvious. Who are the women? Who are the women? They're like, but jubilees, and we have the names, and and so it's really interesting. And there's a lot more to say. We can talk about that another time. But there's a lot of fun stuff that happens with the idea that the women are unnamed in Jubilee or in Genesis. So
well, I mean, we forgot to discuss up front how much time you have to give here this evening. There are two things I do want to just comment for those watching. I was thinking about this as you've talked, and it's kind of lovely, right? The things that have kind of turned you on intellectually, right? This seeing that there are reasons and understanding the methods, and when the language. I mean, that was one of my favorite things to learn about, studying languages, is learning about the morphology, and then like, oh, we do that too. Like, this thing happened and that thing happened, and we're like, oh, that's so cool. Okay, so seeing the connections, and that is itself a reception history, right? The morphology of languages is a reception history, and being able to get back and understand these things is very empowering in a certain way. And right, as a human being, right, intellectual or not, there's just this something nice about being able to understand the process, what happened here. And then to see that draws out for you in terms of the text, and then in terms of the people within the text, or whatever. So that when I wasn't sure how to frame with, like the thumbnail for this conversation. I didn't want to put reception history in the, because I don't know that people necessarily know what that means. But we all, in a sense, really are. I mean, understanding reception history is important in lots of parts of our lives. And so, excuse me. So I don't know. It's just kind of fun to think about your story and the things you've been doing and interested in, and why they kind of all make sense, really.
Yeah, and it's like, I totally agree too, because I use the term reception history all the time now, almost as a protest, because people don't usually get it, or think like, basically I'm going to talk about medieval art and music, because that's kind of like what it has often been. It's like, which composer used these words in their songs, or and for me, like I think of reception history in a lot of different ways. Like, I think of it in one sense, that there's these big lines of stories that get used and recycled, and like, so some people would call that something else, but I think it's the recontextualization, rewriting, readdressing of these things, or redressing of these things even. And then at the same time, I think I'm pretty radical in the field, I think, right now, because I also define manuscripts as reception history. And so
they
that's
are,
like
though,
something,
right? I mean, it's a physical,
obvious,
tangible example of.
It's hard to argue with, but not a lot of people want to say it, because it does something to the field when you say that we don't treat manuscripts any longer as witnesses to the original, but as receptions of
the previous.
Something.
Yeah,
the previous,
whatever that was. Yeah.
And so for me, it's important methodologically, and to kind of set that up and say, well, manuscripts in the same language are receptions, and translations, that's a major reception, and then we get other receptions and adaptations and additions, and we get all kinds of stuff. And you also get what I call atomized receptions. So the names I would call atomized receptions, because they are just individual units that can be grouped together. So they can be molecules as well, but they're often like, you can find just one name. And so some sources would just randomly have the name of Noah's wife or something from Jubilees, or just the two daughters of Adam and Eve, or something like that. And they're obviously coming from Jubilees, because the names don't lie. It's hard to hide that.
Right.
Like, it's not another Azura that we're talking about, it's like, it's her.
Yeah. Right.
and that's also something that's not, I think, not talked about a lot, or not usually part of the discussion when we talk about like receptions and reception history, because there's just kind of been this, I think there's been that line between where reconstructive work for the original is versus what reception is like, it's a floating thing. But I think in traditional scholarship, it's like it's a much later, like you get to the 5th, 6th century or something, then they'll start saying like, oh, now we need to talk about like context and whatever. But they don't want to talk about early reception or manuscripts or translations or things. They want that to be part of textual criticism of the work itself.
Okay.
So even citations in church fathers, right? That's what always makes me laugh, is when somebody will say, well, this reading is found in, in Eusebius or Epiphanius or whoever. And I'm like, show me his Bible. Like, what are you talking about? It's a... And then that's probably from a Byzantine manuscript from 1100, copied in like in France somewhere or something. So it's just like, it cracks me up. But it's reception. It moves away from the original, and then the whole point is that then it's more interesting for me to talk about the process and the context and the social history than it is to talk about what that specific reading tells you about the original reading or something like that. Like it's more fun to see these things travel and they grow and they change and they get used in all these different ways. And the people that are copying them or using them later have a reason, have an attachment to it in some way.
Right. Yeah. And then this also does, I think it seems, without having, I'm so sorry I haven't watched any of your work, the Bible was written backwards videos, but I mean, that's also connected to this, right? I mean, to understand the writing, can you say a little bit more about that? Like I'm assuming, that's what's going on there with your work there.
Yep, that's exactly right. So what I do is just, I mean, my goal is to get to what we're talking about now. But I realized what I wanted to start with was the looking backwards part. Like say that so I conceive of the Bible as a reception, and excuse me, as I like to say, it's a stop, it's a rest stop on the reception highway.
Okay. Yeah.
And so if you conceive of it like a highway, you've got, it's coming from somewhere, and there's a spot that's materialized, and we can see it, but the information, the ideas, everything that's flowing into it comes from somewhere, and it comes from where it is as well. And so it's like but that's why I look at stuff. I mean, I've looked at the Enuma Elish, the Akkadian creation account, and how that affects the primeval history in Genesis. Look at Hammurabi's law and how it affects the formation of the laws. Looking at also the composition of the Pentateuch. So, like, where do these 3 law codes in the Pentateuch, how are they influencing each other, and how does that develop into different categories or societal structures, and then looking broadly at all different types of literature in the Hebrew Bible, and seeing how that really is like, so everything's represented. So we can, I mean, I haven't gotten to it yet. I'm working on this fall a couple of things on wisdom literature. So looking at Proverbs in the ancient context, because we have, obviously, Proverbs didn't appear first in the Bible, and looking at some of the ancient context for that. But also one of my favorites, which I'm also working on, is the book of Job, and the idea of the suffering righteous in that context, because we do have some really good ancient sources older than the Bible that do the same thing, and that even get structured basically in the same way. So we have dialogues with friends, and then
who mean well but are actually traumatizing people.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Wait a minute.
Where have I heard that?
Why does this sound so familiar? But so it's a really, for me, it's just a lot of fun. I get to look at sources, and my goal with it is to actually look at sources. because I think one of the reasons I started doing it, I mean, I didn't grow up having a dream to be a YouTube star or whatever, and I'm still not, obviously, but it's like that. I just realized that I needed an outlet for that idea that I see people talking about, but not usually illustrating. And so people will say, "Oh, well, the Numeless," and then you hear apologists or whatever saying, "Oh, that's just crap. They never show us anything." And I'm like, well, somebody should show that. Somebody should show you that the reason we say this is this. Like, they say, "Oh, Hammurabi and the Bible, that's just made up." But then, like, when you can show that it's word for word, like it's and structured, like there's a reason, and those are things that I've dealt with, I've read, I've worked with, and I think that's what I want to put out there. I want to put out these texts and show what we're really dealing with, for people to be able to access. So it's not just an academic or theoretical discussion that we just throw these bones to people and say it's all written in this ancient context.
Just trust us.
Blah, blah, blah. Just trust me. Yeah, trust me. I've read it.
I know. I've seen it. I've translated it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's actually really important work. I'm really pleased to know that's what you're up to. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then who knows? One day maybe I'll get to do the later stuff too. Like I started to write some scripts for doing jubilees stuff, but then I realized that I know too much about jubilees, and so it just like it gets me overwhelming. It's really hard. It's really hard to do just one video. So I'm gonna have to do like a whole series. Yeah. But we'll get there eventually.
Right. Got time. Yeah.
I've got knock on wood, I got a lot of years left in my career.
Well, right. That, and I was going to make a bad joke about, like, as long as we don't blow up the planet, before in the next few years.
Anyway, let's stay positive.
You're right. Let's stay.
We're doing so well.
This is so fun, right? Yes, I am hopeful that you will have plenty of years ahead of you to work all that into what you're doing. So, Matt, thank you for being here today. I don't want to. You're, I think, 6 hours ahead of us. I'm on the East Coast.
It's
8 o'clock,
almost 7:30, something like that now. 7:20. It's not that bad. It's it's worse when I have to deal with Kip, because Kip's all the way on the other side. Indeed. And he'll be like, "Let's do things at a reasonable hour," and I'm like,
"What's reasonable for you, Kip?"
Yeah, that's right. He's in I don't know what do they call it over there? Pacific time zone. There we go. I'm going to San Diego next week.
Are you? Okay, good. Yeah, I hope I'll get to see you. Yeah,
I will make sure that I get to see you.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I didn't. Let's see over here in the comments. I don't think there were any specifics for you. That tends to happen. Don't take that personally. It tends to be that people enjoy chatting and they don't usually have a whole lot of questions. I guess we could say that if people had questions for Matt, this would be the time to throw them out there, since we're wrapping up. But I'm gonna, they're all just having a good old time, aren't they? So
I always forget that when I go into this StreamYard that you can actually see the stuff, and I see that there's just a ton of chat. I should probably good. Otherwise, I'd have been super distracted trying to read the chat.
I usually give. Oh, Kip has been here. Oh, hey there, Kip.
Hi, Kip.
Yeah.
Sorry, I told stories about you. I hope they were true.
Right. Kip, you did ask a question. All right. I didn't see it because I tend to just focus on the person I'm talking with. Let's see. Kip, where's your question? Okay, I don't know can you re-ask the question, Kip? Okay. All right. Well, I think we can handle the fact that we're not answering Kip's question. Okay, wait.
I mean, Kip can ask me questions anytime.
It's true, but it would be nice if it's here. Thank you, Kip. All right, so at some point, be sure to ask Matt about the shape and contents of so-called Bible manuscripts and the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
So he's it's a leading question because he
Of
knows
course
this
it is.
is what I'm doing these days. So
I'm
it's
like, "Wait, but I'm not sure I
it's
even
just
asked." What's he asking?
yeah.
Okay, the
So
so-called
I mean,
Bible manuscripts?
well, yeah, I mean, so the point is that when we look at the corpus of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that the biblical manuscripts is a really hard thing to define on the to begin with. Like what
Okay,
are
okay,
biblical manuscripts?
okay.
We if we look statistically, 30% maybe are what's found in the Hebrew Bible, and the rest, the
Right.
other 70% or something else. And
Yeah.
then if we
Okay.
throw in all the kind of biblical, so biblical themes and related stuff, then we have 40 or 45% are biblical manuscripts maybe, and then there's all kinds of other stuff. But
Okay.
what I've been doing is trying to systematize the shape of these, of what the manuscripts are. So like what data do we have for the sizes and scopes of these
Huh.
manuscripts?
Okay.
Because most people throw around the word copies when you talk about manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and say like, oh, so Genesis has 23 copies, people would say, found in the caves of the Judean desert. So 20 at Qumran, I think, and then 3 in
Of the
other
whole
caves.
book or just
Well, see, this
sections
is
of
the
it?
thing, and
Oh,
this is the
okay.
problem.
Okay, cool. Okay.
So when you're a keen exegete like me,
Yeah.
you ask, what does copy mean? And the
Right.
problem is that word gets thrown around as though they're copies. And
Yeah.
then when you look at the size and the size of these manuscripts, you see that there's a very clear tendency that ones that have a lot of text maintained tend to have very, very large columns. So they'll
Chunks.
maybe have
Okay.
40, 35 to 40 lines in the column. So they're quite
Mhm.
tall.
Mhm.
They have pretty, they're not super narrow, but they're fairly narrow. So there's this kind of a shape to it that
Huh.
you have that's a standard, seems to be a standard column for a long book.
Okay.
And this is true for Genesis, for Exodus, for Deuteronomy, for Psalms, for all the big books, Isaiah, Jeremiah. We these, they're similar in shape as
Okay.
what we would call it.
Huh.
But for all of these books, we also have manuscripts that have like between 8 and 14 lines of text per
Hmm.
column. So half or less
Huh.
than half,
Yeah.
much smaller. So
Right.
sometimes 5 or 6 centimeters tall. And then you have to ask the question, how much of the book was there? And
Right.
a lot of times the answer is going to be not a lot for
Okay.
those. And so
Okay.
then we see that we clearly, when we're looking at the Bible manuscripts, the biblical manuscripts, they were many different things, right?
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
have some manuscripts were probably big copies of the whole thing,
Mhm.
and others were just not. They were,
Mhm. Mhm.
extracts
Their
or
favorite
were
chapters or something.
right. And so and it's like we see it when you look at the Genesis manuscripts, you see creation is accounted for a couple of
Mhm.
times in these things,
Mhm.
and then a couple of times the Joseph story shows up, and then
Uh-huh.
we have one with the flood story. And so it's like it makes sense. These are things you would
Uh-huh.
expect to find as individual units.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
when you look at some of the like important texts from the Ten Commandments, or from Deuteronomy, the Shema, or other
Uh-huh.
important texts.
Uh-huh.
And then like we can, even when we get to Isaiah, it's also super interesting that we see chapters 1 through 39 are often found in some manuscripts
Mhm.
without anything else, and then
Mhm.
some often 40 through
40 to
66 are found.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so, or 1 through 33, sorry, it's actually 1 through 33, not 1 through
Oh.
39.
Oh.
So it's, the division is at a different place, but it still reflects the
Mhm.
probable circulation of manuscripts in a different format than we think of.
Mhm.
And the Psalms manuscripts then are all over the place as well. Like there's so many of them have a single psalm is
Huh.
all that's reflected in the material we have, and
Huh.
we have no reason to think that a lot of those were originally huge manuscripts, but they were probably pretty small.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So when we talk about having 200 200 manuscripts of the Bible or whatever from Qumran or from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, it's very
We don't.
misleading. Yeah.
Like, it's very misleading. And so,
Yeah.
it's really a thing that I could talk about for hours and
Imagine you could.
do. But yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon, and it's an important thing also to deconstruct in scholarship and in the public, I guess, narrative about the scrolls. Like, the scrolls aren't just copies of the Bible that are identical to the Bible from way back then,
Right.
but they are different in so many ways. It's like they're different in details, and different in scope, and different in style, and also we have so many biblical like texts that just are rewriting or adapting or showing different traditions from the biblical corpus, that it's all over the place.
It's reception history.
It is.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for the extra, input on that. Thank you for the question, Kip. Appreciate it. And I'm going to let you go because
All right.
you've been here for an hour and a half, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, and Kip, and hopefully Josh, and yeah.
Cool.
So,
well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this has been really lovely. I'm going to kick you out for a minute.
All right.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate that there were so many of you who wanted to be here, were able to, and wanted to be here live, chatting, talking amongst yourselves. And I hope for those watching it later, there's something for you as well. This has been a really delightful conversation. And so I appreciate all the different ways that you all support me and help me get the word out about the work I'm doing. At this point, I appreciate that, when you like a video, when you subscribe to my channel, when you share a video with a friend, I now have memberships on my channel. If you wanted to support me in some amount every month, I appreciate that very much. That's it for today. Next week, I think I've canceled it for next week because of this conference that that Matt and I were just talking about. I'll be in transit to it, but the week after, I will be back right after the conference. I'll be in California, streaming live from my family's house there in LA. So 2 weeks, moving it to the day before. So instead of Thanksgiving, do it the day before Thanksgiving in 2 weeks. So I'll see you then. Thanks for being here. And let's go out with this.